Here now to discuss what's in and what's out of this bill. Hatley Heath Manning, Independent Women's Foreign Policy Director, and Shelby Holliday, Wall Street Journal senior video reporter. Shelby, I'll start with you. And my best Buford T. Justice, what in the hell happened to the border wall?
The border wall's out. So the border wall's the big loser here. It's not entirely out. The Republicans are kicking that can down the road. They don't want to have an ugly fight before the midterms. And so that's sort of coming in a next phase, possibly. But that seems to just keep happening with the border wall. It just keeps getting pushed and pushed and pushed down the road. So unclear if that'll ever be funded. President Trump also called to cut some things, and in fact, They were added to. So we haven't heard much from the president on this budget, but it's a big win for Mitch McConnell because finally, the Senate is on track to fund the government before the end of the year, which sadly is a big step.
Well, you know, of course, the midterms coming too. Maybe there's a lot of extra political pressure. I heard you laugh at my Buford T. Justice invitation there, Hatley. What do you make of this? Because it's just, it always feels like whenever we talk about government spending, we end up saying, shrugging our shoulders, pox on both houses. Are you happy with this?
No, I mean, a lot of people are going to be unhappy whenever we're talking about figures as high as $854 billion. That's really hard for the average taxpayer to conceptualize. That's a lot of money. Our federal budget picture has been out of whack for a long time. As Shelby mentioned, this is the first time that, since 2007 that we're appropriating for these individual departments rather than doing the last minute omnibus crunch. So this might be incrementally a step in the direction of responsible government. But we've got to look at the bigger picture. It's so hard. Because we believe, that the deficit's too large. That's what Americans think. We ought to be more responsible generally. But you look at the departments we're funding here, defense, health and human services, labor and education. Those are big ones. Those are popular ones. People like to cut government spending, but they don't like to cut that particular program that they're fond of. They don't like to cut things for veterans or for the military or for healthcare spending here at home. So that's the challenge before lawmakers is that we need to cut spending, but from where?
We did hear that education, I mean, it's a relatively new department. I think it was created under the Carter administration, if I'm not mistaken. And this was supposed to be in the sort of, hey, let's get rid of it, push that to local governments and municipalities, and it's getting bigger and bigger. And again, maybe there's just no will, or maybe this is just one of these bridges to nowhere that every politician's got to bring back to the district.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are concerned because they believe education's underfunded. That's because those dollars aren't showing up in the classroom. We've got a huge education bureaucracy, and that's the case with a lot of these large federal government departments. If we really want to look at reforming government spending, unfortunately, we're ultimately going to have to look at the mandatory spending in programs like Medicare and Social Security. Boy, that's a whole different conversation.
Also known as the political third rail, right? If you can't get rid of education, forget about Social Security.
But
it brings us, right? I mean, it's so interesting because Hatley talks about being responsible, just not shutting down the government. I'm not a politician.
Low bar,
yeah, I think it's a low bar, and I think we've done okay when it has been shut down, and I think we've been reminded that there's wiggle room there, right? Non-essential employees and things like that. But then it does remind us the higher bar. Can we ever get there, do you think?
Well, it's pretty amazing politically how the tide has shifted, and Republicans aren't so worried about the deficit. We heard that a lot from them a few years ago while Obama was president. But we have a president who is the self-declared king of debt, and I think the deficit hasn't become as much of a political problem for them. It doesn't mean they shouldn't care about it. There are some other things in this bill that are boosted from years past.
$21 trillion
opioid
right now?
Funding. We're hitting $1 trillion deficits by the end of the year annually. But there's opioid funding that's way up from last year. And then there's more money in community block grants, which can be used for storms. We're seeing more storms. It's hard to argue communities shouldn't have that money. But in general, there's just the costs keep going up and nothing is really being cut.
And Hatley, again, I'll ask you the same thing. Is it something that we could ever expect? And as far as the overall government debt, is that just the ultimate ticking time bomb and eventually it will blow? We don't know when or when it will. We know probably be under higher interest rates, but when it does, it could be catastrophic.
It seems impossible. What we really need to focus on, though, however, is slowing the growth of government, because anything that is, a budget cut in Washington is just when they decide to spend less money than what they projected that they were going to spend. Right. So you can have an increase in a budget in Washington, D.C., and it still gets called a budget cut. That makes no sense outside of the swamp. So we just need to focus on growing the private sector faster than we're growing government.
Ladies, thank you both very, very much, and I'll work on that Buford T for you.